Hello and welcome to Clear Conversations. My name is Geraint Jones and I'm Clear M&C Saatchi's Global Marketing Director. Today's conversation is a sneak preview of From Chaos to Clarity, our new global study into the future role of the CMO and of the marketing function, launching in January next year on the 21st. It's great to see some old friends and some new ones joining us for today's conversation. I can see we've got people from Bacardi, RB, Intuit, Tata, ESPN, Goldman Sachs, and many, many more joining us, which is fantastic. We're also streaming this session live on LinkedIn, so a warm welcome to our audience there too. As an attendee, your camera and microphone are automatically switched off, so you will not be able to turn them on accidentally, so you can completely relax and enjoy the show. The session is being recorded and we'll be sharing it on our YouTube channel and our website tomorrow, so please watch out for an email from my colleague Saskia or Gary in your inbox with a link. For more content, events, and to watch recordings of this and other conversations, please visit clearstrategy.com/events. The link is in the comments box, or follow us at ClearStrategy. Clear M&C Saatchi on LinkedIn, which is also in the comments box for updates. If you'd like to find out more about From Chaos to Clarity particularly, there is also a link to the landing page for that study in the box. Should you wish to ask a question during the discussion, please use the Q&A function in the bar at the bottom of your screen and start your question with the name of the panelist you'd like to answer. So for example, type David if you want to ask David a question and then your question. Right, with that done, let's get on with the show. Clear, for those of you who don't know, is the strategy consulting arm of M&C Saatchi. And this year we found ourselves in the thick of helping brands to manage the chaos that 2020 has thrown at us. From everything from future scenario planning to rapid agile innovation, category strategy, portfolio management, brand repositioning, proposition development. We've been asked to help brands with a huge number of different things across a number of different sectors in order to navigate a path through the really choppy waters that marketing strategy has found itself in 2020. And in amongst all of that, I think what's been most interesting to us is that we've seen a real change in how businesses are engaging with their marketing departments, how CEOs are engaging with their CMOs in the quest for growth. And for a few years, I think it's been rather fashionable to beat up on the role of the CMO, to sort of describe the CMO as dead in the media. But our experience of this year has led us to believe that marketing and its leaders are having something of a renaissance. So we've invested in a global study of nearly 700 CEOs, CMOs, and senior marketers to size and understand that shift and to help to pinpoint how marketers can go on to cement a position of real strategic leadership in their organizations in the coming years. Today, our Chief Strategy Officer, Rhonda Hyatt, will set up what we expect to see from the study when we publish it next year and share a little sneak preview from the initial analysis of the data before we debate some of the questions raised with our brilliant panel, who I'll go on to introduce now. I'm delighted to welcome Raj Kumar, recently named as one of Marketing Week's top 100 most effective marketers in 2020. Raj is the Group Brand and Reputation Director at Aviva PLC, the leading UK insurer. Prior to Aviva, he held leadership roles in Europe and Asia with companies like Siemens, Experian, and Nokia. And he believes in performance that is underpinned by building a positive, honest, and inclusive culture that embraces change. So perfect for this panel. He's on the board of trustees at the Prince's Teaching Institute, one of Prince of Wales's charities, helping teachers to rediscover the love of their subject, inspiring teachers and changing lives. We're also joined by Emma Lutchford. Emma joined AgriBriefing in 2019 as Group CMO. She oversees marketing and digital teams across the group and has 20 years experience in marketing, digital, and interestingly, IT roles. She began her career working for some of the UK's leading digital and marketing agencies, working on a range of very high-profile clients, and later moved in-house, working in media, financial services, and logistic companies, leading functions ranging from marketing strategy and operations to digital transformation. She's passionate about the use of digital technology and data to address customer and business challenges, and her time in both the commercial and technical function enables her to bring the two specialisms closer together to deliver greater benefits. Again, something that we'll come back to in the discussion. We're also joined by David Bruce. As Senior Vice President of Brand and Integrated Marketing for MLS, or Major League Soccer, David is charged with managing the internal brand and marketing function of the top flight soccer league in the United States and Canada. In this role, he leads positioning work for the league and key fan touchpoints, as well as all campaign development and marketing execution. And he's central to inspiring new marketing and event platforms and initiatives that enable the MLS to continue to grow the scale and reach of its fan base across the world. Prior to MLS, he worked for international brand strategy firm Wolf Olins, leading the London 2012 Olympic brand work and helping to open their Middle East office. And as you'll spot from his accent when he speaks in a moment, David is a native of Sunderland, England, but currently lives in New York with his wife, Amy, and very young son, who may also make an appearance. And finally, from Clear M&C Saatchi, Rhonda Hyatt. Rhonda's our Chief Strategy Officer, and whilst at Clear, she has focused on growing our retail and shopper offer and delivering transformational and clear brand strategy for clients including Reckitt Benckiser, Philips, Nautica, and Abbott. Prior to joining Clear, Rhonda was head of brand strategy and analytics for Interbrand Design Forum, where she focused specifically on retail and CPG clients. I'm now going to hand over to Rhonda, who will share some thoughts and set the scene for our conversation.
All right, thank you, Geraint, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. I'll assume yes. And thank you to our panelists for joining today. We are quite excited about the sort of initial sneak peek of our data that we have just fielded. So from chaos to clarity, I think a topic very relevant to all of us today, especially in the times we're living in. So just to quickly talk about what did we set out to do with this study? So the first thing is really to look at two overarching business questions. There are a number of different findings and insights that have emerged from the study, but the thing that we started with is really wanting to understand in this period of rapid change and uncertainty, how can businesses really think about driving sustainable growth? So that's really the overarching question. And subsequently, as Geraint alluded to, what is the role of marketing in driving that growth? As we have seen the role of marketing really change and adapt and evolve over time, we really wanted to have a picture of what does the future of marketing look like. And so to tip the hand, of course, we believe there is a renaissance period coming for marketing. But to really dive into the data, so everyone is aware, we did conduct a global study. This was actually fielded in September and October. So it was not pre or really during the thick of the pandemic. It has been very, very recent. So it's good recent data. We talked to, as Geraint mentioned, 750 C-suite VPs and directors across the world in terms of US, UK, Germany, China, and Singapore. And it was quite interesting to have those different global perspectives, as well as the different levels within the organization. So I'm going to serve up just two quick data points that we will use to launch into our discussion and hear from our esteemed panel. So the first one that we wanted to look at is just the idea of how clear of a strategy do these organizations have. And what you'll see on the left side of the page is that collectively the C-suite feels very confident. 80% of them in a top 2 buck score say they have a very clearly defined strategy as an organization. However, when we looked at directors and below, only 53% feel that their organization has a clearly defined strategy. So I'm going to tee up that nice big data point. I'm going to go on to the second one, and then Geraint will dive into, would love to have your all's perspective on why we think that that disparity exists between the C-suite and our directors and below. Similarly, the other question we asked is, what do you see as your future when it comes to your next role and your career aspirations? And of the CMOs in our study, 57% of them said their next role and career progression would be to the CEO slot. So that's where they're looking to do. Interestingly, though, of non-CMOs, people essentially in the marketing track who are not at that C-suite level, only 20% of them said that they wanted to be a CMO someday. And so I think this was a pretty astonishing data point for us as an organization to think about, what does that next generation of marketing leadership look like? And how do we really re-engage, very much get people excited and, on that track to continuing to progress towards that CMO role, if that's the right way in the future. So serving up those couple of data points, I'll hand it back over to Geraint to begin the discussion. Geraint, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the button, sorry. Thank you very much for that, Rhonda, and thank you for getting me off mute. We will now go on to join the panel with some questions. If you do have questions, as I said before, please try and put them in the Q&A box below and put the name of the panelist that you'd like to answer the question in front of your question. And I will try and make time for it if I can. So on to the questions. So I'm going to start with the good news. One of the other pieces of data that we found was that sort of 70% of chief executives believe that marketing in the CMO will have and does have a very active role in setting the business strategy. So I'm going to come to you first, Raj, and ask, what do you see as the unique role that CMOs can play in setting that overall strategy? And how have you made time to influence strategy through the chaos of this year?
Thanks, Grant. Yes, I think, especially this year, I would say it's usual for most years, but especially this year, I would say when there's such a change, a magnitude of change that has occurred so quickly, I think a lot of finance people, a lot of these functions have found that they can't rely on last year. And usually 90% of organizations, you just look at the last year, do something in the next year. It's very, change by inches. But I think for the magnitude that has happened this year, the CMO's role is more instrumental. I mean, we bring the outside in, are key in presenting the inside out. So that makes it a truly sort of privileged situation to be in. We interact with most functions to tell the story. And we also relay what's happening with the customers back in. And now more than ever, with people saying the amount of change happening, is the CEOs really want to know what is that change happening? What is happening with the customers? So we play a pivotal role in that, I think. I also feel two other things. One is we're quite used to adapting. I mean, a lot of marketing people would have had their budgets cut down or the reaction to their campaigns not go the way they expected, etc. So I think we're, as a function, very good on our feet. And I think that's another thing that is really helpful in such an environment when you can't actually plan as you could before. There's so many scenarios that could play out. I mean, we haven't even had Brexit as yet. So, and the final thing I think we do is, which is quite important, is that marketers come with a growth mindset. I don't believe, at least me personally, believe that any marketer joins a company to shrink it. We all come in a company because we want to grow it. All of us, all marketers have that. So whereas you have a lot of people talking about cutting costs or maintaining costs or hunkering down, you're not just the optimist, but you're also the one who's thinking, well, hold on, how can I make the situation work? How can I, if I'm in a company, how can I maintain my cash flow? If it's stopped, is there other avenues that I can look to create new cash flow? Or if I'm actually privileged in a situation like where I'm sure Reckitt Benckiser, some of your clients used to spoke of, selling, things which are actually selling quite well in terms of antibacterial or etc. Well, in that case, how do I capture the best market? So I think in that situation, all three, we're really central.
I think that's a really good way to set it up. I mean, Emma, I'm going to come to you next. The question then to you is, how is that similar in the B2B space? I mean, are you in the position where you're also getting asked to be more influential, more of a driver of strategic change within your business? And have you seen that shift through 2020? And what do you expect to come next year?
Yeah, I think it had already happened. And obviously 2020 was sort of just a year where we had to pivot on a lot of things. So for us, certainly we didn't necessarily change our strategy. Those guiding principles are the same. But obviously the sort of the tools and the tactics we had to use this year were very different. And so I think for marketing, it's been a very busy, but a very interesting and productive year. And as much as we've certainly been right at sort of the vanguard of that kind of strategy, but we've also on a very practical level, every way the business wanted to pivot, every way the business wanted to respond to the market, all involves marketers. And I think that's been really good for the teams.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think in particularly in the B2B space, the shifts that have taken place have been enormous. And actually the amazing kind of resilience of marketing teams to be able to deal with that shift and sort of ride it out and come out the other side with some quite impressive innovations very, very rapidly has been something that's been quite brilliant to see, I guess. David, I imagine there's also been quite a big shift from a MLS perspective, and also quite a big demand on your time in terms of leadership, given the constantly shifting sands underneath which sport has to conduct itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys, thanks for having me. It's been a fascinating year. I think you could never have predicted or had a playbook ready for kind of the challenges that we've all gone through. I think Raj said it nicely. I think the idea of remaining nimble at all times, I think in this day and age, has to be really core to how a marketer kind of positions himself or herself in the business to create the change and ultimately the long-term growth that we're all looking to achieve. As it relates to being a soccer league and entertainment business, our very essence of what we deliver was taken away from us overnight, right? We stopped delivering a live experience. We couldn't get back on the field for a number of months. It called into question so many things. But the thing that remained the same throughout, and both the other panelists have kind of alluded to this, and for me, really coming from a classic kind of brand strategy background, has been, if you know who you are, if you truly believe in the core purpose and the ways that your brand is different, and you double down on that, you're able to move through the chaos, and you're able to be nimble, and you're able to get the internal group together very, very quickly in order to deliver to the outside world the things that you know is right for your brand. It doesn't matter the challenges. If you've got an organization that buys into and believes what the brand is and what the brand is trying to do, you set yourself up to be incredibly successful during a period like this. It might not feel it at the time, but when you come out of it, and I think there's so many, the good thing I think about being a marketer now, and there's a lot of very recent case studies that execs and board members can point to, but when there is a downturn in the economy, when there are financial constraints, when there are these epic events that happen in the world that cause consumers to reduce their level of spending or consumption around brands, the brands that come out of that successfully are the ones that double down on who they are. They double down on building their brand. They double down on the marketing function so that when they come out of it, they're best positioned to take advantage of whatever change there has been in kind of consumer psyche and the consumer behavior.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely good point to make. I mean, we've had a number of different marketers on our panels through the whole year, and I think one of the themes that I can draw a red thread through is this idea that actually, if you've got your fundamentals right, if you're in a position as a business that you've got a clear understanding of where you're headed and a clear strategy for how you're getting there, and then the marketing elements line up behind it, then you're in a much stronger position than those businesses that aren't entirely sure about how all of those bits fit together. And it sounds sort of self-evident, but actually it's not as easy as all that to put together that sort of structure. So it's been quite interesting to see the businesses that have succeeded through the crisis and those that have struggled a little bit more. I think one of the things that we're also seeing from our study is this question mark over whether chief executives and chief marketing officers are actually on the same page at this point in terms of what their priorities should be. And I think it's funny because I think, on the one hand, a chief executive can be saying, we've got to focus on the long-term strategy and, be considerate of the fact that actually, COVID and the other major crises of 2020 are passing crises, and actually overall there are bigger, more fundamental shifts at play within our world that we need to worry about. But at the same time, talking out the other side of their mouth, they're coming back to their marketing team and saying, where are my leads? Where are my opportunities? Where's my next quarter set of numbers? And so it's interesting that we've had back from our CEOs that there is this need for marketers to shift focus to the longer term, whilst the marketers that we've spoken to have said, actually our focus for this year has actually been about applying the right sort of tactics to deal with the short-term impacts that have come through 2020. And actually it's been hard to find the time to kind of look to the long term. So my question really is, and I'll come to you on this one first, Emma, if I may, given the obvious opportunity for CMOs to become more influential in the boardroom, should they be more concerned about the big picture issues beyond COVID? Do they have the time to be more concerned about those big picture issues like data transformation and others?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not changed this year. I think it was always the case. It's just this year has made it very real. And so I think it's just that typical challenge of making the time. But yes, I think, in my business, it's quite an interesting one where my CEO actually is an ex-marketer. So he's done my job, and I'm probably a bit spoiled there because actually he understands the bigger picture for a marketer. He doesn't sort of pigeonhole as the sort of the words and pictures department, which is great. So I think it really is just, it's on me and my team to actually find the time and have the right sort of processes to run the kind of the big picture and the strategy alongside actually delivering a hell of a lot of work this year.
Yeah, it's been a theme, hasn't it, of every conversation I've had this year with CMOs. It's been, I've never been more keen to have a strategic influence on where we're headed, and never had less time with which to have that strategic influence. Has that been a case for you, David, with all of the things that you've had to pivot to and manage through the summer particularly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one characteristic that a CMO can provide as it relates to both short and long-term strategy, based on just the ever-changing nature of the world around us. And I don't think, again, going back to my earlier point, I don't think we've ever seen a news cycle turn so quickly. I mean, you may think you set up one day and then you literally wake up the next morning and it's all being blown apart. I mean, I said it, like, remaining nimble at all times has been so key to everything we do. For us, given we have a passionate base of fans who we hope will continue to follow our teams through thick and thin, regardless of what happens. And that, I think, is the power of great sports marketing, when you're able to tap that emotional side of how a consumer connects to a sports team. But for us, it's really been, given everything going on, this ability to read the room like never before. I think, not being tone deaf to what is happening around us, that goes into, there's practical tools there, right? Social listening. That's the channel clearly that we're alive on the most, consistently every day, every hour, talking to our fans. But the things that we've had to deal with, from COVID to social justice to the presidential, hopefully the presidential changes and whatnot over here. Now more than ever, brands have to be alive to the world around them. They have to find their role within that world, because consumers are looking to brands for an answer to certain things. They expect a brand to assume a certain role in their lives. And even when our product's turned off, they still need us in their lives. It just changes slightly. So, we got to read the room. Like, one characteristic I would say that, I've brought forward, and I tell my team and I tell the marketing leads at the other clubs, is if there's one thing you do, is read the room like you've never read the room before. Because there's sensitivity, but there's also huge opportunity when you do that. And being aware of that world around you, and know that you have a strategy to lean into, but that strategy might have to pivot and shift slightly based on some of these things that are happening in this orbit, in this spin, this accelerated spin in this orbit that we're currently in.
It's a really interesting point about, reading the room and having the flexibility and I guess agility, as much as anything else, to be able to pivot to those needs as you need to. Raj, I mean, how difficult is it to do all of that, to pivot kind of seamlessly, to listen very intently to the needs of your customers on the fly and react to those needs in the moment, whilst also keeping a weather eye on the overall strategy, on that sort of that long-term plan that you have? And how easy is it to give yourself the time to make sure that you are putting everything through that lens of strategy?
Actually, I think it's quite difficult depending on what kind of industry you're talking about, because there have been some where you literally have to keep the lights on. So I think I can speak only for sort of my industry and my experience over here, but essentially you are part of two teams. So essentially you're part of the exco or the executive team, whatever you want to call it, and you're part of the marketing function. I think as a part of the executive team, your duty is strategic, and your duty is making sure that that strategic vision is there. As a part of the marketing function lead, your duty is to make sure that the tills are running, in one sense. So I think it marries that both together, and you should be able to wear both the hats, because all the other people do definitely wear both the hats also. So I think for me, it's a question of knowing that as part of one team, that's your responsibility. As part of the other team, that's your responsibility. As far as I think on the fly goes, at Aviva, we have a constant monitoring. So it's every day. It's not just listening. It's a constantly running survey, for example, for want of a better word. And we really look to ask and feel what is happening with consumers. And we've got a pulse of it every week. We get all that data and we make sure that we're reacting to it. And most in our times, I think I've said this before, it's not been about acquisition or sales or anything. It's actually been about discovery. So people wanting to know about their policies, how they're changing, how they would be affected by COVID, how they won't be affected by COVID. What about their pensions? How are they changing? What about my savings? So I think for us, it has been a lot of, when we're listening, we're going, this is the time to make sure people are reassured about what they have, to have clarity in what they have, rather than going, that's just a sales opportunity. So I think, yeah, you really have to, as was said before, look at the room, read the room as far as your immediate tactics go. But the long-term vision remains that. I think you always need to be prepared for that.
Rhonda, you've had an interesting year of advising clients from all sorts of different sectors on this exact challenge of, the ability to be both present in the moment, but also considering the future. Have you got any advice for the audience on what they should be considering, and anything that you've picked up through this year that you think are the key points that people should be considering as they move forward?
Yeah, certainly. I think the panelists so far have done a really nice job of summarizing a couple of these things. And I think one of the points that Raj made a bit earlier around every industry is sort of in a different space. So if you're in one of the industries where it's a highly relevant supply right now, let's say some of those more essential products or sanitizing or whatever, it's interesting when you look at that data, because then you have to decide how predictable is this supply curve, or demand curve rather, going to last? And how do we make sure that we're making decisions that allow us to deliver against that, but not at the expense of some of the futuristic thinking? And I think, everyone has really highlighted the fact that you can't just let your strategy change overnight. Your brand purpose, what you stand for, what you're trying to achieve as an organization, has to stay steadfast. But that agility and adaptiveness on the tactics, and really making sure that you're ear to the ground, paying attention to what's going on. And I think a lot of times what we've also seen with clients is making sure that there's that scenario planning, and you're thinking through what are the different routes that this could take, whether the timing of this changes, how long we're going to be in this, how some of the social things that, David, you mentioned are going to have lasting impact versus shorter term impact. So I think it's a matter of staying steadfast, but also scenario planning and thinking about the agility and being able to react. And then I also think the last layer to that is sort of what we saw in the study as well, is making sure that the teams really understand their role in delivering that. So it's great for the C-suite to have clarity, but making sure the teams are equipped and understand how to react on the fly will really help make sure that action is not just talked about, but actually strung through and being able to drive impact.
Yeah, it's a lovely summary. I think I'm going to come into that a bit about the team, and I'm going to come back to you, Emma, on the first team that Raj mentioned in his comment, the Exco team, and talk about the specific skills that the Exco and the chief executive come to marketing for in a crisis like this. What are the secret weapons that you think marketing has to help navigate and then take advantage of and grow through a crisis such as the one we're going through?
I think it's really our broad reach. I think it's always been marketing strength, and why it's still such a really interesting career is the fact that we genuinely do sit in the middle of all the different areas. We're commercial, we're creative, but also we're deeply embedded in many operational processes. And I think it is that sight and that ability to work with the different departments, which really is our strength, and is why it's a shame when we're pigeonholed, because actually that is exactly what we're best at.
Have you found this year to be more collaborative as a result of, your background's quite interesting because you've done IT, you've done marketing, you speak both languages ultimately. Have you found that it's been more collaborative, that it's been easier? Has it been harder? What's been your experience?
Yeah, it's a bit of a cliche now, but a lot of people have said that this year has just made them do a lot of the things they were supposed to do anyway. It's made them do them faster. We've been a lot better at product development and things like that. And actually, that's been where marketing has really shone, I think. It's because we would be involved in any sort of new product development, any pivot in approach. We're right in the middle of that. We're touching all of the teams with that. And so I think that's been something that we've really sort of shone at this year. Certainly within our own business, we've probably had our most successful product development year ever, because we just cut through a load of the stuff that used to bother us. There was a lot of it was just, thinking it was our own problems that we were enforcing on these projects.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think quite a lot of businesses have found themselves go through transformation that maybe would have taken another 5 or 6 or 10 years in a very, very short order. And they've realized that actually a lot of the things that were holding them back were actually internal issues, that there was as much internal chaos as external chaos. And the external impact of 2020 has allowed them to cut through quite a lot of the nonsense that was holding them back internally. But talking about internally, talking about teams, to pick up on Rhonda's point about making sure everyone is on message. David, I'm going to come to you and just talk about one of the other interesting points that Rhonda picked up on in her slides at the beginning. That was just the sheer number of people in sort of senior but not CMO level roles that we talked to, who suggested that a role outside of marketing was likely to be the next step on their career path. Has, for your mind, has the role of CMO and marketing in general become less attractive? Or what's your perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting stat, and obviously I haven't seen the study in its entirety yet, which I'm excited to do. I was surprised to kind of hear that, because I think there is, especially now the world that we're in the last 12 months, there is more creativity and there's more possibilities as a marketeer than there's probably ever been before. And both Emma and Raj mentioned the horizontal role of the marketing and brand function, in that it wraps its arms around everyone and ultimately gets everyone singing from the same song sheet. But I think there's so much ability for the marketeer to inherently have more creativity in the things that they do, connect the dots between different silos and subsets of the internal organization, whether it's tech, whether it's digital, whether it's business intelligence, whether it's outwardly facing functions, events, social media, whatever it might be. So that I'll be honest, that stat really did surprise me. And I think we're only going to see the ability for a CMO or a marketing lead to be more creative in the world that we put ourselves into, because I think consumers are asking more questions of brands. They're asking more questions of the business. I think execs are asking more questions of the marketing lead as a result of that. And as the guys both said, the marketeer is ideally placed in between the internal and the external forces to best understand that and pivot against it. In our world, a lot of the pressures that hit our marketing function were really at the bottom end of the funnel. And it was really about, okay, what are we doing? Where's the revenue? How can we convert? Like, show me. And you've got to have a minute there to say, I get it, but all these things are happening in that we're not delivering what is our true product at the moment. And there is still so much we need to be doing at the top end of the funnel. And that's where all the creativity can come. So if you're able as a marketeer to get that balance nice, where you can grow and you can get eyeballs and you can do some of those outside of the box creative things up here, then I think you set yourself up and you set the organization up for success when you trickle down into the bottom end of the funnel and you look to convert, and you look to create action around those people that you've excited, somewhere else within the marketing mix.
It's a really good point. I think I'm really interested in your perspective, Raj, on what is it then? Is it that quite a lot of mid-senior level marketers have found themselves through 2020 in just panicked execution mode, and maybe not panicked, but very intensive execution mode? And as a result, they're not able to see that sort of strategic impact they're having. And therefore they're thinking, well, if I'm just an executional marketer, what am I doing here?
Very good point. That is something that we are sort of afflicted with, I think, as marketing, where it's like two or three things, right? Is the CMO's role a campaigner? Are you all about a campaign? If that is a role, I can quite well see that, people are going, I need some more experience than just being a campaigner. Literally just get the next campaign, roll it out, come on, same, repeat, rinse. I think that's one. I think the second thing is to give the CMO the responsibility, but also the ability to execute on it is a big thing. Sometimes it's almost like a wash up of things, and you go, I'll take a bit of that, a bit of that, a bit of that, and you're responsible for it. It's a big CMO job, and you go, hold on, I don't have any levers to pull over here. Somebody's responsible for somebody else's budget. I don't have access to that. Those resources are supposed to be mine, but they're following somebody else's strategy. So, but I'm responsible for all of it. How? So I think there's a bit of that. And people going, you're not really set up for success. I think so. That could be another view of looking at it. And the third thing, actually, I think is, I believe marketing at its heart is actually quite simple. You put in £1, you get £1.10 back. It goes into a black box called marketing, and you get something back out of it. So, but the ability to prove that and the ability to speak in that language, as simple as it is difficult. So I think having a stint in some other function does give you that expanded sort of view about how things could be. So I think, yeah, I would say those were the top 3 reasons why I would believe that people want to get out and then probably come back. I hope they come back.
Oh, Emma's nodding away there because, I mean, she has gone through this. I mean, I'm just reminded of a brilliant Marketoonist cartoon from a year or 2 back, where there was just this image of the CEO with his arm around the CMO in front of a lever. And in front of the lever was a big wall. And on the wall, it said, "This is full P&L responsibility, including influence on all different elements of the P&L." And the marketer turns to the CMO, as the CEO, and says, "What happens if I pull the lever?" And the CEO goes, "It cuts your marketing budget." So there's a lovely illustration of some of the kind of pieces in that. And by the way, we're going to be partnering with Tom Fishburne, the Marketoonist, on From Chaos to Clarity through the next few months, which is a slight plug. Emma, I'm going to come to you now. You've done that, exactly what Raj just said. You've come out of marketing, gone and done something else, and come back. Why?
Well, so I was, I took the kind of the unusual step of moving to IT of all places. But yeah, it was about 5 years ago. And I got to say that I was reading things about marketing, at that time, certain companies were removing CMOs and putting in chief growth operators and all those sort of things instead. And I was reading about these pressures, but I wasn't feeling them myself. I was feeling very pigeonholed as just the communications department, just the campaigns department, as you said, Raj. And so I didn't feel in control of my own destiny. And I didn't actually see a future as a CMO. And strangely at the time, a lot of digital transformation was happening. And I actually thought, well, going to IT will give me more ability to change the direction of the business. So a bit of a sort of big step there to take. But yeah, I did a few years in IT, and actually in the end, it was really just moving to the right company with the right view on what marketing really is, that it isn't just comms, it's actually, it's everything. And that sort of really reinvigorated my view on marketing. But I wouldn't say it was wasted time going to IT at all. It is extremely important to sort of, walk in the shoes of anyone else, especially with marketing. Obviously, we're heavily reliant on technology and data these days. So it does, it's given me that appreciation, and I hope it works. It helps me to work better with those teams these days as well.
What's the one piece of advice on that then that you would give to somebody who's in your shoes but 5 years ago, who's sort of sitting there going, do you know what, I'm not 100% convinced. What's the one thing that they should do to stick out, to become interesting to future recruiters and give themselves the best chance of taking on whatever role in a senior position they want to go to?
I think we've alluded to it. It's not a waste of time going to another department. Genuinely, I think depending on what stage in your career you're in, I think it's very useful to go and do a stint somewhere else. If you're in a large company, you might have the ability to actually do a secondment or something like that. And actually, I think that's maybe something that large companies should encourage more, is the ability for people to actually go and do some time elsewhere, learn about the rest of the business, and put themselves in those other people's shoes. So I think it would be to just get that greater understanding of the business. If you don't feel you can do it in the job you're in right now, is there a way of doing it within the same business, or sort of actually sort of upskilling yourself some other way?
Rhonda, I'm going to come to you now. This sort of question of the future development of the marketer. Are there any particular areas that you think actually you would be advising your clients to focus on in terms of their personal development?
Sure. So I think all 3 of you have, as marketing leaders, really touched on a couple different topics. And just to give one more piece of the data, I know I'm not supposed to release too much, but David, that stat surprised us as well. And if you want to know, which we all, I'm sure, could have assumed, the more junior people on the team, where they want to go is startup land, right? Because it's sexy, it's exciting, you can ride a slide between meetings, right? Like it's the exciting, sexy side of it. But what is most important about that, and you all touched on, is there are these tensions that exist between the responsibility and the seriousness and the performance aspect of your role, balanced with the creativity, and creativity not being just about comms and brand campaign, but creativity on problem solving and figuring out different ways. And I think what's really interesting, Emma, you mentioned, you didn't see that clear path to having that bigger strategic role. So it was like, well, let me go get some other skills. Let me kind of look at different areas and different ways to grow. And I think it's actually doing a good job of communicating that downward, because I think a lot of the teams see the pressure that CMOs are under. They're like, ooh, that's not what I want to do. That's not for me. But actually showing more of the impact and the strategic aspect, and really, whoever said it, marketing is everything. Being able to let the team see that and see how much impact that they want to have. Because if you look at really the core driver of why they want to go to a lot of the startups, yes, it's the fun and the sexiness, but it's about impact. They feel that they have a direct route to impact at a startup, where we don't, necessarily see that path in large organizations. But what's really most interesting about all of this is that this year, many companies, big organizations, have had to act and think like startups to really react and respond to the crisis. And I think that's something really interesting as a platform for us as a marketing community, you guys as senior leaders, to really make sure that message is being spread, more broadly, especially to those junior team members.
Thanks, Rhonda. I think I'm interested now in sort of the next phase. So we've talked a little bit about the chaos of this year. We've talked a bit about how good organizations, good marketing organizations, good marketers, good senior leaders in marketing have responded to it, adjusted their perspective, and got on with the challenge. But beyond 2020, a lot of the burning issues that were present before this are still present now and will remain present for the future. I mean, just today, the UK Prime Minister has announced that we're all going to be buying electric cars from 2030, which still sounds like a long way away, but it's only 9 years. And there are so many things wrapped up in that, from the climate change potential alignment between the US and the UK as we move into a new political cycle, to all of the huge changes that are happening socially around the Black Lives Matter movement and other elements. But these were not things that appeared this year. They just ended up with more focus perhaps this year, or more oxygen perhaps this year. And although they're more pressing, some of those things are really endemic. And I'm reminded of that sort of Jeff Bezos quote, which is, don't look for what's changing to build your business around and to build your strategy around. Look for what's staying the same. So what are you guys doing? I'm going to come to you, David, next. What are you doing particularly that so that you're able to help your team carve out the thinking space to focus on where the next wave of growth is going to come from and where the next real focus for your team is going to be?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've got a really interesting marker over here, and especially when we think about our sport, we have the 2026 World Cup is going to be in the US and Canada and Mexico, and we have our league in the US and Canada. So when you think about long term, you think about where you want to get to, you think about the growth of soccer, the growth of MLS, the ability to attract and retain and deeply connect with fans. That for us is like this ultimate kind of check. And it's also this ability for us to kind of hook our strategy to, so we can ramp up and we can create a sense of what do we need to do between now and then. So that's out there as a marker. We are surrounded by, in our world, some amazing partners, right? There's a sports property, you have commercial partners. So we have some of the great, blue chip firms as partners of the league. So you've got Adidas, you've got people like Heineken, you've got people like Audi, you've got AT&T. I could go on and on and on. Some of these brands are best in class in their industries, and we get together with them many times throughout the year to talk about not just a partnership, but what we're both seeing in our businesses and how we can build and grow together, because they're there to amplify our story and to connect their brands into our story and to tell it in a slightly nuanced way. We're also blessed to have a set of media and broadcast partners that are also best in class. You think about Fox, you think about ESPN, you think about Univision. We've got content deals with people like Bleacher Report, 433, some of those who are doing interesting things with much younger consumers. So we talk to them a lot as well about what are you seeing? What trends are you seeing in the media space and the digital space? How should we serve up and think about content? What types of things do we think we need to, or how do we need to reinvent the broadcast, for example? That's a big one for us. So we had a session once the suspension of the league kicked in and the COVID virus meant we had to close down. We got together with our network partners and we spoke about what does the future of the broadcast look like? We got a minute here. Like, we're putting this thing on every single week and we're just churning through. We got a games. Let's get them on air. But we've never had a moment to go, well, actually, what should it look like? What innovations and what things are out there in the world that we just haven't had a chance to pull into the actual experience itself? And that led us to adding, you know, much deeper data overlays, virtual insertions of fans, virtual insertions of partners, extra cameras, mics embedded in the field. There was a whole suite of things that we did around our return to play tournament as a result of that. So for us, we're set up because we have this suite of stakeholders around us that we can talk to. But overall, the thing that I say to my team and the group is be curious. Always be curious. Always tear apart what we've done. Like, you know, I think Apple say it really well, but they launch their iPad and the next day, or the iPhone the next day, their technicians are tearing it apart. What could be better next time? Like, that is a great mentality to take forward. Like, I think, you know, as marketeers, you want to show and prove out and report to the execs, look what happened. But it's an important piece, but I also want to tear apart what we just did and have an honest moment with everyone to say, was that the best we could have been based on what we know now and what tomorrow might look like? Because we're going to do this event again in 12 months time. So what should it look like in 12 months time? And that curiosity and that ability to pick apart and to question what you've done and be okay with that and not feel like you happen to be defensive for any reason is such a key characteristic of driving a culture that tries to innovate and think about what's next for us.
Yeah, I think you're echoing something that Doug Palladini, the global brand president of Vans, was getting at in our Points of Clarity interview last Thursday, where he was talking about the power of creativity and the importance of looking at your approach to creativity with a critical eye, but being confident enough to say, you know, it's not going to be perfect every time, but we can improve it every single time we do it. And I think the other thing that's interesting here, I mean, I saw Emma nodding away. You know, it's tapping into something that you said yourself earlier, Emma, about this year for you, which has been actually you've been able to create and deliver new things, cut through processes that were perhaps slowing you down in the past, to carve out that space to identify the next wave of growth and actually execute against it and get ahead of the game. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason it's worked is obviously it had to work. We had to sort of get better at doing this. But equally, you know, back to sort of David's first point is just being true to yourself, knowing exactly what those guiding principles are, exactly who you are. And so even if you have to sort of comment on different things, go out on different channels, it's still sort of remembering that and being authentic. Because we've obviously seen this year that, you know, people who tried to jump on bandwagons have failed. Customers see straight through that and it backfires badly.
I can only agree with that. I mean, we've talked a couple of times on Clear Conversations about some adverts that may or may not have appeared at the beginning of the crisis. What I'm going to come to next is this idea of challenges, though. And Raj, I'm going to come to you and talk about the pressing challenges that are sort of in your in tray for fixing or getting ahead of before we get into 21. You know, is it people, is it training, is it development, is it new channels, is it what is it that you think are the most key things that are going to help you to find that next wave of growth?
I think for me it's a slightly different question actually, but I would say to find different set of growth, I need the team to be really performing really well. It has been a very tough year, as most people would attest to, and I think we've been running at 100 miles an hour. It's easier when you're in the crisis, you know, you have that adrenaline rush. I think it's got much more, it's got tougher. It's taken a lot of time up as a leader. So you have to spend, I've personally had more demands on my time, I would say, than previous. And I have to make more efforts in reaching out to the team and making sure that I'm having that conversation constantly, that sort of temperature check. Interestingly, one of the things I learned from one of the other seminars with our HR colleagues was that apparently one of the signs of anxiety and mental stress is that you stop putting your camera on when you start coming to calls. So if you see someone who used to have their camera on but now just doesn't, you know, you might want to just catch up with them. So it's things like that, really noticing, because ultimately we have to make sure that we are there for our people, and our people are also there. everybody's in so many different situations. You might be living alone, you might be a carer, you might be a single parent, you might be, there are so many just things that you have to get on with. And this year has really dragged on. So I think, there is good news on the horizon. There are vaccines today. Pfizer said 95% sort of whatever, proof that it works. You've got Christmas coming. You've got the end of lockdowns. So I think there is good news. But for me, the primary sort of way to look into it is look at the people, look at our people, to make sure we are ready for next year.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, and I think it's one that often gets overlooked. So thank you for making it. It's so important to remember the difference and the different ways in which people have experienced this year. And I think for the first time in my career, it's been an incredible privilege, and also at some points quite terrifying, to be invited into my colleagues' homes and to see actually how they live and how they behave, and how this crisis has impacted that. You can see I'm working from my my son's bedroom with the now famous lavender wreath, and it's been a part of my life to work in a bedroom for nearly 12 months, and that's just one small part of the experience for us, whereas the experience for other people has been quite different. And I think being cognizant of that is crucial.
Yeah, I think we were talking about Christmas actually. I just reminded we just had a conversation about Christmas parties, and we won't be able to get together. I mean, I don't think so. So it's again the feeling of, well, how do we all get together just to get a little bit more of that physical touch or contact that we needed face to face, really.
Yeah, I think it was easier in some respects here in the UK in the summer because we could get together in parks and see each other from a distance. The winter in the UK is obviously not ideal for parks, but we'll have to see how that all comes together. I'm gonna wrap up with just a last question for all of you, which I'll ask you to answer relatively quickly, but it's about prioritization. We know that there are lots of different challenges and there are lots of different moving parts. David, I'm going to come to you first. How are you prioritizing and ensuring that you prioritize the right challenges for the next year?
Yeah, I think it comes down to plan for what you know, get ready for what you don't. Again, and it goes back to my first point, which is if you know who you are and you have a really good sense of what your brand's all about, and that's been signed off by the organization, then that provides the filter for the things that we need to do next year. And we know we're going to be challenged, right? There's going to be financial challenges, there's going to be market pressures and challenges, there's going to be things going on with consumers that we need to be mindful of. So for us, it's leaning into who we are, it's using that really, really strongly as a filter. And as I say to my guys, we should always think about the output of marketing as always in a state of beta. Like, we can read the tea leaves, we can read the room, we can listen all the time. And I think if we got to it in the conversation, but consumers are more forgiving now, and I think they've ever been. I think they know brands are trying stuff, and if it doesn't work, you pull it back and you try again. And I think they know that ultimately some of that execution feels a little bit more DIY. The amount of advertising and campaigning that is really kind of DIY in nature, shot on iPhones, shot in sons' bedrooms or daughters' bedrooms. It's expected by consumers now. So I think that idea of in a state of beta, try stuff, DIY nature, but with brand at the core to help make decisions is really kind of key for us.
Emma, how are you prioritizing for next year? Are you looking at different ways of judging what you're up to? Are you looking to data? What is it that you're using to drive your prioritization?
I think similar. It's the fact that we have an overarching strategy, and that has not changed through 2020. That was set before, and we're still pursuing that. I think, like many businesses, we're doing business planning at the moment, and just with COVID in mind, you could submit 3 vastly different business plans. You have no idea, do you? So it's just kind of sticking to those kind of guiding principles. And certainly, we as many businesses, data is a massive focus in terms of just using it better. Understanding it and using it better, and I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. It's interesting that it's been a really big topic for many years now, but still in all the surveys you see, it's still the thing that most CMOs say they need to get better at.
Yeah, it's the homework that doesn't get done. Raj, I'm going to come to you for the final time on this prioritization question. You know, how is it that you're ensuring that you're being choiceful about what you focus on for 21?
I like the word that you used there, because I don't like prioritization, because for me it just means rejigging of the 20 tasks you have, but you still have to do 20. Choiceful is much better for me. So which is what we're looking to do is saying, you're going to do these 5 things. These are what we'd agreed on. That's what we're going to do. If they change, all right, but we're not going to say, here's 20 in this order, but we're going to change the order because something else has changed, but we still need to do 20. So I think that's really helpful, because otherwise you always sort of add in the sort of basket, so to speak, but never take anything out. So that's sort of my philosophy.
Yeah, it's what guides us actually at Clear. Rhonda, I mean, you can touch on this more than I can, but this idea that a clear strategy makes it easier to be choiceful is kind of what anchors this business.
Yeah, I think it's about, always having a focus on what do we need to solve for now, but not at the expense of everything else that we still have to solve for. It's just being more flexible and adaptive for sure. And I think the last point too, Grant, I would just mention is just around remembering the importance of communication. We've talked about it in terms of making sure we're connected to our teams, connected to our leaders. And then Raj, as you nicely summarize the sort of humanity point that exists as well, is just making sure we're communicating so that people, everybody wants to make sure that we all collectively get through the year. So just working together, having that good communication up and down, so that everybody can contribute and we all, do get through it together.
Thank you. So I'm going to say thank you to all our panelists, and just to say, I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I mean, it sets up what's coming in January brilliantly. I mean, we've talked about the kind of the potential influence that marketing can really now wield in the boardroom. We've talked about making sure that we help to get ourselves on the same page as our colleagues in the boardroom, and how we can do that by walking a mile in their shoes, understanding their specific needs, but also being strong enough as marketers and marketing leaders to have a clear strategy in mind, to adhere to that strategy as much as you can, whilst being flexible around the tactics and the situation as the situation changes around you. We've talked about, marketing leadership. We talked about the next generation of that, and this idea that actually, how do we help the next generation of marketing leaders to create a kind of a portfolio career of experience that allows them to be better marketers in the future. And in doing that, we've also talked very, very strongly, and I think it was a beautiful point you made, Raj, about this idea of making sure that we're empathizing with the needs of our teams, that we're checking in with them, that we're being conscious of the challenge that this year has put in front of them, and that actually, if they have felt like they've been an executional machine for the year, that they potentially need to have a bit of an arm around the shoulder and a bit of a relaxation at some point soon, if that's possible. And then the final part is this idea of getting on the front foot and staying there. How you can be, and I'm going to use the word again, more choiceful about the things that you invest time and effort in 2021, because the more choiceful you can be, the more impact we think you can have. And I'm really, really excited to see what comes in from Chaos to Clarity, which we'll publish on January 21st. It's going to be a really interesting study. This has just been a huge teaser, probably more than I expected. Thanks, Rhonda. But we will come back to you with more depth, much more clarity around some of the big issues facing marketing in January. And in the meantime, do check back to clearstrategy.com/events or clearstrategy.com/chaos to clarity to see more about what we're doing, including the partnership with Tom Fishburne, the Marketunist, and also our upcoming Points of Clarity interviews with CMOs from around the world. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you again to all of our panelists and wish you all a wonderful evening, or in your case, David and Rhonda, a lovely rest of morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
See you soon. Bye-bye.